The envelope sat heavy in my coat pocket as I watched my son David slide a diamond bracelet across the table to a woman who wasn't his wife. 25 years of marriage, he'd told me that morning. 25 years with Karen deserved something special, he'd said when I handed him that envelope containing $30,000. Money I'd saved quarter by quarter, overtime shift by overtime shift at the factory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Money that took me 4 years to accumulate after my wife Martha passed. And here he was at the Chancellor, the most expensive restaurant in Indianapolis, fastening that bracelet around the wrist of Amber Reed while his wife sat at home helping their daughter Sophie with algebra homework. I stood near the bar, partially hidden by a decorative column, my weathered hands gripping a glass of water I'd ordered just to blend in. The chandelier light caught the diamonds as Amber laughed, tilting her head back in a way that made my stomach turn. David leaned in close, whispering something that made her smile wider. The same smile he'd given me 3 hours earlier when he hugged me and promised the anniversary trip to Hawaii would mean everything to Karen. His words had been so sincere, so filled with gratitude. I'd actually felt proud watching him leave my small ranch house in Fountain Square, envelope tucked safely in his jacket. My son, I thought. Making his marriage work. Honoring his commitment. The waiter arrived at their table with champagne, the expensive kind that costs more than my monthly utility bill. David didn't even glance at the price, just nodded and watched Amber admire her new jewelry in the dim restaurant lighting. I'd seen enough. My legs carried me toward the exit on autopilot, past tables of couples celebrating legitimate occasions, past the hostess who smiled professionally, past the valet who offered to retrieve a car I'd parked 3 blocks away because I couldn't afford their parking fee. The October air hit my face like a slap of reality. Indianapolis streets hummed with evening traffic, people heading home to families, to honest lives, to relationships built on something more solid than lies and stolen money. I walked those 3 blocks in a daze, my Ford truck waiting under a streetlight like a faithful old dog. The engine turned over with its familiar rattle, and I sat there for 10 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, trying to process what I'd witnessed. My phone buzzed. The flip phone Martha had convinced me to get 2 years before she died, insisting I needed to stay connected even though I'd argued that landlines worked fine for 50 years. David's name appeared on the small screen. "Hey Pop, just wanted to say thanks again. Karen's going to be so surprised. You're the best father a man could ask for." I stared at those words until the screen went dark. The best father. I'd worked double shifts when David was young, missing little league games and school concerts to keep food on the table. I'd paid for his college education at Indiana University, every semester in full, because I didn't want him starting adult life buried in debt like I had been. When he married Karen at 21, I'd given them the down payment for their first house. $10,000 that represented a year of eating bologna sandwiches and skipping my own small pleasures. The drive home took 20 minutes through familiar neighborhoods where I'd lived my entire life. Past the factory where I worked for 38 years before retirement. Past Sacred Heart Community Center where I volunteered teaching woodworking to teenagers every Thursday. Past Jean's Root Beer stand where Frank Morrison and I met for coffee most mornings, solving the world's problems over eggs and toast. Everything looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of reality. My house sat dark and quiet when I pulled into the driveway. The small ranch-style home Martha and I had bought in 1978, raising David within these walls, celebrating holidays and birthdays and ordinary Tuesday dinners. I'd kept everything exactly as she'd left it. Her reading glasses still on the nightstand. Her coffee mug in the cabinet. Her presence woven into every corner of this place. What would Martha say about what our son had become? I made tea, something I'd learned from Martha during her final months when coffee upset her stomach. The ritual calmed me slightly. Boil water. Steep back. Add honey. Sit at the kitchen table that had hosted thousands of family meals. The envelope's absence felt like a phantom limb. $30,000 that had taken 4 years to save. 4 years of skipping restaurant meals, driving my ancient truck instead of buying something newer, wearing clothes until they literally fell apart. Also, I could give my son something meaningful to honor his marriage. My brother Walter called around 9 o'clock, his voice cheerful with retirement contentment. "George, you want to grab breakfast at Jean's tomorrow?" Frank mentioned something about a fishing trip he's planning. I made noncommittal sounds, letting Walter's words wash over me without really processing them. After we hung up, I sat in my recliner, the one that still bore the impression of Martha's smaller frame from years of sitting together watching evening news. Sleep came in fragments that night. I kept seeing that bracelet catching chandelier light, kept hearing David's voice thanking me for being such a good father, kept imagining Karen's face when she realized there would be no Hawaii trip, no romantic anniversary celebration, just another year married to a man who valued appearances over honesty. By morning, I'd made a decision. Not a rash one born of anger, but a calculated choice rooted in self-preservation and painful clarity. Jean's root beer stand smelled like bacon grease and coffee when I arrived at 6:30. Frank was already in our usual booth, his weathered face creasing into a smile when he spotted me. "Morning, George. You look like something the cat dragged in and the dog wouldn't eat." I slid into the cracked vinyl seat across from him, accepting the coffee the waitress poured without asking. Frank and I had worked the same shift at the factory for 23 years. We'd celebrated births and mourned losses. We'd survived layoffs and equipment malfunctions. If anyone would understand what I needed to say, it was Frank. "I need to tell you something," I started, watching steam rise from my coffee cup. "And I need you to just listen until I'm finished." Frank set down his menu, his expression shifting to concern. I told him everything. The envelope of money. David's promise about the anniversary trip. Following an instinct I couldn't explain to the Chancellor. What I'd witnessed. The bracelet. The champagne. The lies delivered with such practiced ease. Frank listened without interruption, his calloused hands folded on the table between us. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" he finally asked. I pulled out the business card I'd retrieved from my desk drawer that morning. Thompson and Associates, estate planning attorneys. "I'm going to protect what's left," I said. "Martha and I worked too hard building something to leave it to someone who treats family like this." The law office occupied the third floor of a downtown building near Monument Circle, the kind of place I'd normally never have business entering. Glass doors opened to a reception area with leather furniture and abstract paintings that probably cost more than my truck. A young woman behind a polished desk looked up with professional courtesy, her expression shifting slightly when she took in my flannel shirt and work boots. I dressed in my church clothes initially, then changed back. If they couldn't handle an honest working man, I'd take my business elsewhere. "George Henderson to see Thomas Reed," I said, matching her professional tone. She nodded, fingers dancing across her keyboard. "Mr. Reed is expecting you." Just one moment. The waiting felt eternal, though the wall clock showed only 4 minutes had passed. I studied the framed diplomas and certificates, the expensive furniture, the fresh flowers in a crystal vase. Martha would have loved those flowers. She'd tended a garden for 40 years, coaxing roses and tulips from Indiana soil with more patience than I'd ever possessed. Thomas Reed emerged from a side hallway, hand extended in greeting. He was younger than I expected, maybe 45, with graying temples and wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Henderson, pleasure to meet you. Frank Morrison spoke highly of you." That detail relaxed something in my chest. Frank had served on the community center board with Reed's father, had vouched for the son's integrity and discretion. "Come on back to my office." The room overlooked Monument Circle, Indianapolis spreading out below in patterns of traffic and commerce. Reed gestured to a chair across from his desk, settling into his own with practiced ease. "Frank mentioned you're interested in reviewing your estate planning. Can you tell me about your current situation?" I explained about Martha's passing 4 years prior, about the life insurance payout and the equity in our home. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. About the lakefront cabin in Michigan we'd bought 30 years ago, now worth considerably more than we'd paid. About retirement accounts and savings bonds and the modest but respectable sum I'd accumulated through decades of careful living. Total assets around $780,000, Reed said, making notes. And your current will leaves everything to your son David? I nodded, my throat tight. That will was written 20 years ago when David was young and responsible and married to a good woman. Things have changed. Reed set down his pen, giving me his full attention. I told him about the $30,000, about the Chancellor restaurant, about Amber Reed and the diamond bracelet. About lies delivered with such conviction I believed every word. I want to change my will, I said firmly. I want to make sure David gets exactly what he's earned through his choices. Reed studied me for a long moment. Mr. Henderson, I need to ask if you've confronted David about what you witnessed. Sometimes situations aren't what they appear. The lawyer in him, I recognized, trying to prevent rash decisions. I sat in my truck for an hour that night thinking about alternative explanations, I replied. Maybe she's a colleague. Maybe the bracelet was a group gift. Maybe I misunderstood everything. Then I remembered the way he looked at her. The way he touched her hand. The way he lied to my face about Karen's anniversary trip. I didn't misunderstand anything. Reed nodded slowly. All right. Let me explain your options. For the next hour, we discussed trusts and beneficiaries and legal protections. He explained how I could establish conditions, create separate bequests, designate specific assets to specific purposes. The law, I discovered, offered numerous tools for people wanting to control their legacy. I want the house to go to my grandchildren Tyler and Sophie when they turn 25, I said, making decisions that felt simultaneously vindictive and protective. Equal shares. I want the cabin to go to my brother Walter. He and his wife actually use it. David stopped visiting years ago once he got too important for family vacations. And the liquid assets? Reed asked. I thought about this carefully during my sleepless night. I want to establish a charitable trust. Sacred Heart Community Center has been trying to fund a new workshop for their youth programs. They need $80,000. I want to donate $100,000. Another $100,000 goes to hospice care at St. Vincent Hospital, where they took such good care of Martha. Reed wrote everything down, his pen scratching across legal paper. That's $200,000 allocated. You have approximately $580,000 remaining in liquid assets after those charitable donations. I took a breath, steadying myself for the next part. Betty Sullivan has been volunteering at Sacred Heart for 15 years. She organizes the community meals, coordinates the senior activities, basically keeps that place running through pure determination. She's 71 and still working part-time as a grocery store cashier because her late husband's pension barely covers rent. Reed's eyebrows rose slightly. You want to leave money to Betty Sullivan? His tone suggested he'd heard my story before, the lonely widower making questionable decisions about female friends. Betty has been my friend for 12 years, I said evenly. She brought meals after Martha died. She sat with me during the worst of the grief. She never asked for anything, never expected anything, just showed up because that's who she is. She deserves security. She deserves to stop worrying about rent and grocery bills. I want to establish a trust that provides her with $5,000 monthly for the rest of her life. Reed calculated quickly. At average life expectancy, that could total $300,000 or more depending on investment returns and longevity. You'd be leaving David potentially only $280,000 from an estate worth $780,000. David just spent $30,000 of my money on his mistress, I replied. He'll be lucky to get what I'm planning to leave him. Reed set down his pen, removing his glasses to clean them with a cloth from his desk drawer. Mr. Henderson, I have to advise you that family members can contest wills, especially when there are significant changes shortly before death or evidence of undue influence. The legal caution, I understood, protecting both of us. I'm 74 and healthy. My doctor says I've got good genetics and the constitution of someone 10 years younger. This isn't a deathbed decision made under duress. This is a man who finally sees his son clearly after years of willful blindness. We spent another hour working through details and legal language. Reed explained the documents I'd need to sign, the witnesses required, the timeline for everything to become official. I'll have the paperwork ready by end of week, he said as we concluded. Plan to spend about 2 hours reviewing and signing everything. Bring 2 witnesses who aren't beneficiaries and aren't related to you. Frank Morrison, I thought immediately. And maybe Carl from the community center. Good men who'd understand what I was doing and why. Walking out of that office building into October sunshine, I felt lighter despite the weight of decisions I'd made. Monument Circle bustled with lunchtime activity, office workers grabbing sandwiches, tourists photographing the soldiers and sailors' monument. Life continuing in its normal patterns while mine had fundamentally shifted direction. My phone buzzed as I reached my truck. David's name on the screen. Hey Pop, wanted to invite you for dinner Friday night. Karen's making pot roast, your favorite. The kids would love to see you. I stared at that message, imagining the scene. Karen's pot roast that she'd perfected over 25 years of marriage. Tyler and Sophie talking about school and friends. David playing the devoted husband and father while $30,000 of jewelry sparkled on another woman's wrist somewhere across town. Sounds good, I typed back. See you Friday. Because I wasn't ready for confrontation yet. Because I wanted to see my grandchildren. Because sometimes you had to sit through one more dinner, smile through one more lie, before burning bridges that needed burning. The week crawled by with painful slowness. I maintained my routines, volunteering at Sacred Heart, having breakfast with Frank, attending Sunday service at the church Martha and I had joined 43 years ago. Betty Sullivan caught me after service, her warm smile genuine in a way I'd stopped expecting from family. George, you seem troubled. Everything all right? We sat on a bench outside the church, late October sun filtering through trees that had dropped most of their leaves. Just working through some things, I said carefully. Family complications. Betty nodded understanding. She'd buried her husband 6 years ago, had weathered her own storms of loss and financial struggle. Family can be the greatest blessing and the deepest heartache, she said softly. Sometimes both at the same time. Friday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for late October in Indianapolis. I drove through Carmel's manicured streets where every lawn looked professionally maintained and every house screamed comfortable affluence. David's 2-story colonial sat on a corner lot, its facade illuminated by landscape lighting that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Karen's minivan occupied one side of the 3-car garage, David's Lexus the other. The third bay stood empty, waiting for whatever luxury vehicle he'd convince himself he needed next. Karen answered the door with flour dusting her hands and genuine warmth in her eyes. She'd always been kind to me, this daughter-in-law who'd married my son fresh out of college and stuck with him through career changes and financial pressures. Her blonde hair showed threads of gray she didn't bother hiding, laugh lines bracketing her mouth from years of smiling through life's chaos. George, so glad you could make it. The roast should be ready in 20 minutes. She hugged me carefully, mindful of her floury hands, and the embrace felt like betrayal by proxy. She had no idea. No clue that her husband was spending anniversary money on diamond bracelets for women whose names she'd probably never heard. Tyler thundered down the stairs, 15 years old and all gangly limbs, his father's features emerging from childhood softness. Grandpa. Did you bring the checkers set? We had a standing game whenever I visited, my grandson showing genuine interest in the old-fashioned pastime I'd taught him years ago. In the truck, I confirmed. We'll play after dinner. Sophie appeared more quietly, 12 years old with Karen's gentle disposition and a book tucked under her arm. She hugged me around the waist, her head barely reaching my chest. These kids. These innocent casualties of their father's choices. David emerged from his home office, phone in hand, that professional smile fixed in place. Pop, great to see you. Let me just finish this email. He typed rapidly, his attention divided in that modern way that Martha had always found so rude. She'd insisted on full presence during family time, no television during dinner, no phone calls unless emergency. Values from a different era that seemed quaint now in this house of distracted affluence. "Done," David announced, pocketing his phone. "How was your week?" "Productive," I said, the word carrying more weight than he could know. "Took care of some business downtown. Saw Thomas read about updating paperwork." David's attention sharpened slightly. Thomas Reed was known in Indianapolis legal circles, his name carrying certain implications. "Estate planning stuff?" David asked casually, too casually. "Smart to keep that current. Martha would want everything organized properly." The audacity of invoking his mother's name while living a life that would have broken her heart made my jaw clench. Dinner unfolded with practiced family choreography. Karen's pot roast was perfect as always, tender beef with potatoes and carrots that had simmered for hours. Sophie talked about her English teacher assigning To Kill a Mockingbird, her young voice animated discussing themes of justice and moral courage. The irony wasn't lost on me. Tyler described his basketball team's chances this season, his enthusiasm infectious despite my distraction. Karen asked about my volunteer work, genuinely interested in the woodworking classes I taught to teenagers who needed positive outlets and patient mentors. David played his role flawlessly. Attentive husband asking Karen about her shift at the dental office. Engaged father praising Tyler's free throw percentage. Devoted son inquiring about my health and whether I needed help with house maintenance. An Oscar-worthy performance from a man who'd looked into my eyes a week ago and lied without hesitation. I watched him across the table, this stranger wearing my son's face, and wondered when the transformation had occurred. Was it gradual, imperceptible shifts over years? Or had there been a specific moment when David Henderson, the boy who'd cried when his little league team lost, became this polished deceiver? After dinner, Tyler set up the checkers board on the coffee table while the adults lingered over coffee. Karen brought out apple pie she'd baked that afternoon, her hospitality as genuine as her ignorance about her marriage's reality. "George, you seem quieter than usual," she observed, settling beside me on the couch. "Everything okay?" The concern in her voice twisted something in my chest. This woman deserved so much better than what she'd gotten. 25 years of loyalty and partnership, rewarded with lies and betrayal while she baked pies and worried about her father-in-law's well-being. "Just reflective," I managed. "Martha's birthday would have been next week. Some years it hits harder than others." The lie came easier than I expected, though it contained a kernel of truth. Martha's absence felt more acute lately, her judgment and moral clarity something I desperately missed. She would have known what to say to David, how to confront him without destroying the family completely. I lacked her diplomatic grace, possessed only my own blunt honesty and bone-deep disappointment. Tyler demolished me at checkers, his young mind sharper than my distracted focus. Sophie curled up with her book, occasionally reading passages aloud that she found particularly meaningful. David scrolled through his phone intermittently, his attention never fully present despite physical proximity. Karen worked on a crossword puzzle, her reading glasses perched on her nose, completely at ease in her domestic contentment. A tableau of family normalcy built on foundations of sand and deception. My phone buzzed around 8:30. Betty Sullivan's name appeared on the small screen. "Sorry to interrupt, but wondering if you're free tomorrow afternoon? The community center needs help moving supplies for the fall festival." I excused myself to the kitchen to respond, grateful for the interruption. "I'll be there at 2, I typed back, the simple exchange grounding me in a world where people meant what they said and followed through on commitments. David found me in the kitchen, his expression carrying calculation disguised as casual concern. "Everything all right, Pop? You seemed distracted all evening." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his expensive watch catching overhead light. That watch had been a 40th birthday gift from Karen, I remembered. Platinum and sapphire, purchased with money from her nursing overtime shifts because she'd wanted him to have something special. "Just tired," I said. "Getting old isn't for the weak." He laughed, the sound hollow. You're the toughest guy I know. Still outworking men half your age at that community center. The compliment felt like manipulation, buttering me up for some upcoming ask. Speaking of which, Karen and I were talking. We'd love to help out more with your expenses. I know retirement income can be tight, and you shouldn't have to worry about money at your age. There it was. The setup for more control, more access, more influence over my finances and decisions. I'm managing fine, I said firmly. The factory pension and Social Security cover what I need. I don't require help. David's smile tightened fractionally. I just meant you shouldn't have to volunteer so much if you'd rather take it easy. Maybe travel a bit, enjoy retirement. I could supplement your income, make things more comfortable. The offer sounded generous to untrained ears. To me, it sounded like a man already calculating inheritance, impatient for access to assets he considered his eventual property. I volunteer because I want to, not because I need money, I clarified. And I updated my will this week, actually. Everything's organized exactly how I want it. David's expression shifted, surprise breaking through his controlled facade. Updated your will? Is something wrong health-wise? The concern sounded genuine enough, though I detected undertones of calculation. I'm healthy as ever. Just wanted things current and clear. Thomas Reed handled everything professionally. I watched my son process this information, seeing wheels turn behind his eyes as he calculated implications and possibilities. That's great, Pop, really responsible. David's recovery was smooth, but I'd seen the flash of something else first. Anxiety maybe, or greed thinly veiled. If you ever want to discuss the details, I'm happy to help. I've learned a lot about financial planning through work. The offer to help rang false, a transparent attempt to gain information about assets and distributions. Everything's handled, I said. Reed knows what he's doing. The evening wound down shortly after, Tyler needing to finish homework and Sophie already yawning into her book. I hugged my grandchildren goodbye, holding them slightly longer than usual. Karen walked me to the door, her kindness unwavering. Thanks for coming, George. It means so much to the kids, having you involved in their lives. Her words landed like physical blows. I was involved now, but would I be welcome after truth emerged? Would Tyler and Sophie understand why their grandfather had rewritten his will, or would David's version of events poison them against me? David followed me outside, ostensibly to admire the clear October night. Stars visible despite suburban light pollution, the air crisp with approaching winter. Pop, I really appreciate everything you've done for our family over the years, he said, his tone carrying uncharacteristic solemnity. I hope you know how much we value you. The statement felt like preemptive manipulation, laying groundwork for some future conversation. You raised me right, taught me the value of hard work and family. I try to pass those lessons on to Tyler and Sophie. I looked at my son in the darkness, his features shadowed and indistinct. Actions matter more than words, I said quietly. Your mother and I tried to teach you that. What you do when nobody's watching reveals who you really are. David nodded, missing or ignoring the pointed subtext. Exactly. That's exactly what I tell the kids. He clapped my shoulder in masculine affection. Drive safe, Pop, love you. The words followed me down the driveway, into my truck, through Carmel's perfect streets back toward my modest neighborhood. Love you. Did he mean it? Had he ever meant it, or had I been just another resource to be managed and exploited? The questions circled through my mind as Indianapolis lights blurred past my windows, my city feeling suddenly unfamiliar despite 60 years of residence. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, exhaustion had settled into my bones. Not physical tiredness, but the soul-deep fatigue of maintaining pretense and swallowing truths that demanded expression. Saturday morning arrived with frost coating my truck's windshield, November asserting itself after October's lingering warmth. I scraped ice with methodical strokes, my breath forming clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. Frank had texted the night before suggesting we skip our usual breakfast, something about his daughter visiting from Chicago. The change in routine left me unsettled, my day suddenly shapeless and unstructured. The community center opened at 9. I arrived early, letting myself in with the volunteer key Betty had entrusted to me 3 years ago. The building smelled like industrial cleaner and the faint mustiness of an aging structure that served its purpose despite cosmetic imperfections. My woodworking classroom occupied the basement, a space I'd helped renovate with donated materials and weekend labor. Workbenches lined the walls, tools organized with the precision Martha used to tease me about. A place for everything, she'd say, and everything in its place. I was inventorying sandpaper supplies when footsteps echoed on the stairs. Betty appeared carrying 2 coffee cups from the diner down the street, her smile apologetic. "Saw your truck outside. Figured you could use some company." She handed me a cup, the warmth seeping through the paper sleeve into my cold fingers. Betty wore her usual volunteer uniform of comfortable jeans and a Sacred Heart sweatshirt, her gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Nothing about her appearance suggested she knew anything about updated wills or trust funds. Just a friend bringing coffee to another friend on a cold November morning. "Frank told me something's weighing on you," she said gently, settling onto one of the workshop stools. "He's worried but didn't want to pry." Of course Frank had noticed. 30 years of friendship meant you couldn't hide emotional turmoil behind forced smiles and empty reassurances. "Family troubles," I admitted. "The kind that make you question everything you thought you knew about people." Betty nodded, her expression carrying the wisdom of someone who'd survived her own disappointments. "My son Jeffrey stopped calling about 6 years ago. Just drifted away after his father died. Christmas cards for a few years, then nothing. Some relationships don't survive life's pressures." We sat in comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who've shared enough history to not require constant conversation. Through the small basement windows, I could see neighborhood kids playing in the park across the street, their laughter carrying through glass and concrete. Simple joy unburdened by adult complications. "I did something this week that David's going to hate," I said finally. "Changed my will. Made decisions that protect people who deserve protection and teach lessons that need teaching." Betty's hand found mine, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman past 70. "Good men sometimes have to make hard choices. The fact that you're struggling with it tells me you made the right call." Her certainty steadied something loose inside me. "I included you in the new will," I continued, needing her to hear it directly. "Established a trust that'll provide monthly income for the rest of your life. Nothing you need to do, nothing you need to worry about. Just security you've earned through decades of showing up for other people." Her eyes widened, coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. "George, you can't." "I don't. That's not why I'm your friend." The protestation came immediately, exactly as I'd expected. Betty Sullivan didn't operate with ulterior motives or hidden agendas. She'd brought meals after Martha died because that's what decent people did. She'd organized the community center's senior programs because elders deserved dignity and engagement. She'd befriended a grieving widower because loneliness was a burden best shared. "I know why you're my friend," I said. "That's exactly why you're in the will. You never asked for anything, never expected anything, never treated our friendship like a transaction. You deserve to stop working at 71. You deserve to not worry about rent or medical bills or whether you can afford Christmas gifts for your grandkids." Betty's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. "Your son is going to think I manipulated you. He's going to contest it, 'cause problems." Her concern was for me, not herself. Even receiving life-changing news, her first thought was protecting someone else from conflict. "Let him contest," I replied. Thomas Reed built ironclad protections into the documents. I'm of sound mind, acting without coercion, making informed decisions about my own assets. David has no legal grounds, just entitlement and disappointment. Betty set down her coffee, both hands gripping mine now. "What did he do, George? What happened to make you take such drastic action?" I told her everything. The anniversary money, the Chancellor restaurant, Amber Reed, and her diamond bracelet. The lies delivered with such practiced sincerity. the realization that my son had become someone I no longer recognized or respected. "Oh George," Betty whispered when I finished. "I'm so sorry. No parent should have to face that kind of betrayal." Her sympathy felt genuine, unmarred by judgment or schadenfreude. "Karen doesn't know," I added. "She's planning their anniversary celebration, probably wondering why David seems distracted lately. Those kids worship their father, completely unaware he's living a double life." Betty's expression hardened slightly. "Men like that eventually get caught. The lies become too complicated to maintain. You can't build anything real on foundations of deception." We worked together that afternoon, organizing supplies for the fall festival Betty had mentioned. Folding tables needed setting up in the gymnasium. Decorations required sorting and inventory. Small tasks that provided structure and purpose while larger questions loomed unanswered. Other volunteers trickled in throughout the afternoon, people who gave their time because communities needed commitment and service. Margaret Chen arrived with donated baked goods, her Chinese accent still thick despite 40 years in Indianapolis. Father Rodriguez from Sacred Heart brought boxes of canned goods for the food drive. These were my people, I realized. Not David with his Lexus and Country Club membership, but working folks who understood that value couldn't be measured solely in dollars. My phone rang during a break in setup. An unknown Indianapolis number. "Mr. Henderson, this is Thomas Reed. I have your documents ready for review and signature. Can you come by Monday morning at 10? I confirmed the appointment, pulse quickening at the finality it represented. Once I signed those papers, once witnesses verified my signature and intent, the changes became official and binding. David's inheritance would shrink from $780,000 to roughly $280,000. The house would bypass him entirely, held in trust for grandchildren. The cabin would go to Walter. Charities and Betty would receive the bulk of liquid assets. Monday morning arrived gray and threatening rain. I dressed carefully in slacks and a button-down shirt, wanting to present myself as competent and clear-minded. Frank met me at Reed's office as planned, along with Carl Whitman from the Community Center Board. Both men understood the gravity of what we were doing, their presence as witnesses carrying legal and moral weight. "You're sure about this?" Frank asked one final time as we rode the elevator to the third floor. "Completely sure," I confirmed. "More certain than I've been about anything since Martha's funeral arrangements." The signing took 90 minutes. Reed walked us through every page, explaining clauses and conditions and language stripped of legal obfuscation. The charitable bequests to Sacred Heart and St. Vincent Hospital. The trust for Tyler and Sophie ensuring they'd inherit the house at 25. The cabin deed transferring to Walter. Betty's monthly income trust structure to survive market fluctuations and provide stability. And finally, the remainder to David, significantly reduced from what he'd expected but still substantial by most standards. "This distribution will likely surprise your son," Reed noted diplomatically. "Family members often have expectations about inheritance. You should prepare for difficult conversations." I signed each page with my full legal name, George Albert Henderson, the pen feeling heavier with each signature. Frank and Carl witnessed, adding their own signatures and printed names. Legal formality transforming private decisions into binding documents that would outlive me and govern asset distribution after my death. Walking out of that office building into November drizzle, I felt simultaneously lighter and heavier. Lighter because I'd taken control, made choices that reflected my values rather than David's expectations. Heavier because I knew what was coming. The confrontation when David eventually learned the truth. The accusations of manipulation and undue influence. The potential estrangement from grandchildren caught in crossfire they didn't create. But some actions were necessary regardless of cost. Thanksgiving loomed 3 weeks away, traditionally hosted at David and Karen's house with extended family gathering for turkey and ritual expressions of gratitude. This year felt different, charged with knowledge that sat between us like an uninvited guest. My phone showed a text from Karen asking about my pie preferences and whether I had dietary restrictions I hadn't mentioned. Her thoughtfulness felt like reproach by proxy. She was planning holiday celebrations while her husband maintained his secret relationship, while I harbored my own secrets about redistributed inheritance. I spent that evening at my kitchen table with Martha's old photo albums, physical books filled with printed pictures from an era before digital storage. David as a baby, his face scrunched in newborn confusion. David at 5, gap-toothed and grinning beside his first bicycle. David at graduation, mortarboard askew, his future stretching unlimited before him. When had things changed? When had the earnest boy become the calculating man? Or had seeds of his current character always existed, hidden beneath youth and my own willful blindness? The phone rang late, after 10, when most people my age were already asleep. David's name on the screen. "Pop, sorry to call late. Just wanted to check in. You seemed off at dinner last Friday. Everything okay?" His concern sounded genuine, or maybe I'd just lost the ability to distinguish performance from authenticity. "I'm fine," I said. "Just dealing with some things. Nothing for you to worry about." A pause, then David's voice again, carefully casual. "Those estate planning documents you mentioned. I don't want to pry, but if there's anything I should know, anything I can help with, I'm here." There it was. The real reason for his late-night call. Anxiety about inheritance, about control, about assets he'd mentally claimed as future property. "Everything's handled appropriately," I said. "Reed did excellent work. Martha would approve of how things are structured." Another pause, longer this time. "That's great, Pop, really great. I just want to make sure you're protected, that nobody's taking advantage of your generous nature." The implication hung between us. David worried about gold diggers and manipulators, completely blind to his own exploitation and betrayal. "Nobody's taking advantage," I said firmly. "I made informed decisions with clear understanding of consequences. Exactly what your mother and I taught you to do." David laughed, tension breaking slightly. "You taught me well. Sometimes too well. I question everything now, always looking for angles and motivations." The admission felt revealing, a glimpse behind his carefully maintained facade. "Anyway, get some sleep. Love you, Pop." The call ended, leaving me staring at Martha's photographs scattered across my kitchen table, wondering if the man I'd raised still existed somewhere beneath layers of compromise and corruption, or if that person had been replaced entirely by someone I no longer knew. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early December, 3 weeks before Christmas. I was replacing a broken window latch when my phone vibrated insistently against the workbench. Karen's name flashed on the screen, unusual for a weekday morning when she'd normally be at the dental office. "George, I need to talk to you. Can I come by?" Her voice carried a tremor I'd never heard before, something raw and fractured beneath her usual composure. She arrived 20 minutes later, her minivan pulling into my driveway with uncharacteristic speed. I met her at the door, immediately recognizing the devastation in her red-rimmed eyes and rumpled appearance. This was a woman who'd just had her world shattered. "I found receipts," she said without preamble, her voice hollow. "Hotel charges, jewelry purchases, restaurant bills. All dated when he told me he was working late or traveling for business." I confronted him this morning. He admitted everything. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd examined those estate planning documents, where I'd looked through Martha's photo albums searching for answers about when my son had changed. Karen's hands shook as she accepted the tea I offered, her wedding ring catching light through my window. 25 years that band had circled her finger. 25 years of loyalty rewarded with betrayal and lies. "Her name is Amber," Karen continued. "He's been seeing her for 18 months. 18 months, George. While I was planning our anniversary trip, while I was working overtime to help with Tyler's braces, he was spending money on her. The anniversary trip. My $30,000 that had purchased diamond bracelets instead of Hawaiian sunsets. Karen didn't know about that part yet, I realized. Didn't know her husband had stolen from his own father to finance his affair. "I'm filing for divorce," she said firmly, her devastation hardening into resolve. "The kids are old enough to understand, or they will be eventually. I won't stay married to a man who treats vows like suggestions. Pride mixed with my sympathy. This woman had steel beneath her kindness, strength she'd never needed to display until circumstances demanded it. David called me last night, she added. Wanted me to talk to you about his inheritance. He's worried you've changed your will, worried that Betty Sullivan has manipulated you somehow. Karen's laugh was bitter. Even now, with his marriage collapsing, he's thinking about money and control. I told him to leave you alone, that you're entitled to do whatever you want with your own assets. He didn't like that response. The conversation shifted her perspective, I sensed. Seeing David's priorities laid bare in crisis revealed character she'd perhaps rationalized or overlooked during calmer times. I did change my will, I admitted. After I saw him at the Chancellor with Amber. After I discovered he'd taken the anniversary money I gave him and spent it on her instead of you. Karen's face drained of remaining color. You knew? You've known for weeks? The accusation in her voice was justified. I'd sat at her dinner table, eaten her pot roast, hugged her children, all while holding knowledge that could have spared her continued deception. I didn't know how to tell you, I said quietly. Didn't want to be the one to destroy your marriage, even though he'd already done that himself. She stood abruptly, pacing my small kitchen with barely contained energy. What else don't I know, George? What other lies am I living? I told her about the 30,000, about watching David fasten that bracelet around Amber's wrist while Karen believed he was planning their anniversary celebration. I told her about the new will, about protecting Tyler and Sophie's inheritance and trust, about leaving the cabin to Walter and establishing charitable donations. About Betty's trust fund and David's significantly reduced portion. Good, Karen said fiercely when I finished. He doesn't deserve your generosity. He doesn't deserve any of it. The divorce proceedings moved with surprising speed. Karen hired an attorney who'd built a reputation on protecting betrayed spouses, a woman who approached marital dissolution with the efficiency of a surgeon. By January, David had moved into an apartment near his dealership, his visits with Tyler and Sophie supervised by Karen's careful scheduling. The kids handled it better than expected, teenagers being more perceptive than adults gave them credit for. Tyler had apparently suspected something for months, had noticed his father's distraction and secretive phone behavior. Sophie withdrew initially but found solace in books and her mother's steady presence. David called me twice during those weeks. Both times I let it go to voicemail. Both messages followed similar patterns, starting with concern about my well-being and ending with questions about the will. Pop, we should talk about your estate planning. I heard some concerning things from Karen. Call me back. I deleted the messages without responding, my silence its own form of communication. Some conversations weren't worth having, some bridges weren't worth maintaining. February brought unexpected news. Betty called on a Thursday evening, her voice carrying barely suppressed excitement. George, the community center board just approved funding for the new workshop. Your donation made it possible. They want to name it after Martha. The gesture overwhelmed me, unexpected recognition for a woman who'd lived quietly and died without fanfare. She'd have loved that, I managed through tightness in my throat. She always believed in giving young people tools to build better futures. Spring arrived with its usual Indiana unpredictability, warm days interrupted by late snowfalls and sudden thunderstorms. I sold the house in Fountain Square to a young couple expecting their first child, their excitement reminding me of Martha and I 4 decades earlier. The cabin in Michigan became my permanent residence, the place where Martha and I had spent summers and planned retirement. Walter helped with the move, his steady presence grounding me through transition. You're doing the right thing, he assured me while loading boxes. Starting fresh somewhere that holds good memories instead of painful ones. Bloomington offered exactly what I needed. Anonymity in a college town where retired factory workers drew no particular attention. I opened a small workshop restoring antique furniture, the skills I'd taught teenagers now applied to Windsor chairs and farmhouse tables. Betty visited monthly, the drive from Indianapolis manageable for someone no longer worried about gas money or car repairs. We'd grown closer through crisis, our friendship deepening into something neither of us had expected at our age. Not romance exactly, but companionship and mutual respect that made daily life richer. David sent a formal letter in May, his attorney's letterhead official and intimidating. Notice of intent to contest the will, allegations of undue influence and diminished capacity, demands for psychiatric evaluation and financial records. Thomas Reed handled it with professional detachment, providing documentation of my competency and the witnesses who'd verified my clear intent. The challenge collapsed within weeks, David's attorney apparently advising him that he had no legitimate grounds and would likely incur additional legal fees for nothing. I never spoke to my son again. That realization hit me one evening in August while sitting on the cabin's deck watching sunset paint Lake Michigan in shades of amber and rose. A year had passed since I'd watched him fasten that bracelet around Amber's wrist, since my understanding of him had fundamentally shifted. Tyler and Sophie visited regularly, Karen facilitating relationships despite her own justified anger. They'd adapted to divorce with resilience, their essential goodness suggesting that something of Martha and I had survived in them despite their father's failures. The workshop bearing Martha's name opened in September, gleaming tools and proper ventilation exactly what she'd envisioned for community programs. I attended the dedication ceremony, standing beside Betty while the board president spoke about legacy and service and the importance of investing in future generations. David wasn't there. I hadn't expected him to be. Some absences spoke louder than any presence could have. My inheritance when it finally mattered would go exactly where I'd directed it. To grandchildren who'd learned the value of patience and planning. To a brother who'd always shown up when needed. To charities serving communities with dignity and care. To a woman who'd demonstrated that friendship required no transaction beyond genuine human connection. And to David, enough to be comfortable but not enough to avoid consequences. Some lessons couldn't be taught with words. Some required the sharp clarity of actions and their irreversible results. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.